From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro says the country will send a document to Washington on Wednesday ordering the U.S. to stop its threats. Maduro says a national document declaring the threats by the United States illegal will be signed by 10 million Venezuelans. He took direct aim at Trump while declaring that the armed forces stand ready to defend the country. Venezuela's leader says his country is facing an unprecedented threat.
We'll start with a national day, with a core document addressed to the people of the United States and to President Donald Trump. A document demanding him to withdraw all the threats of intervention. A document demanding the respect of the constitutionality and legality of the life in Venezuela. A document demanding the respect of international law. And we are going to have it signed starting on Wednesday by at least 10 million Venezuelans. We are going to sign the document that we are going to bring to the White House of the United States demanding respect. Speak about war in the 21st century. It's nonsense, Mr. Trump, to even think that you are going to send your army to this country that has people who will defend it, because there are men and women in Venezuela that under any circumstance will march against these inhuman thoughts.
President Maduro has condemned the decision by some European Union countries, including Spain, to back opposition figure Juan Guaidó as the president of Venezuela. This comes after President Maduro rejected an ultimatum from the EU to call new elections within 8 days.
There will be blood on the hands of Mr. Pedro Sanchez forever. History will remember him as someone who was at the service of Donald Trump's interventionist policies.
And on Monday, protesters interrupted a meeting of the so-called Lima Group held in Ottawa, Canada, which was held on the political situation in Venezuela. Two women unfolded a banner and chanted "Hands off Venezuela" in reference to Canada's recognition of the Venezuelan opposition leader as interim president. The protesters were escorted away by security.
The human right and the opinion of the people. Why are you saying me like that? You don't have the right.
Protests also took place in 5 different Canadian cities against the meeting, which was being held in Ottawa. These are images from Toronto in front of the offices of Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland. The message was clear: hands off Venezuela, no sanctions, no coup. No coup. And a small demonstration was also held in Vancouver, British Columbia, on the other side of the country. The group of Canadians say that they disapprove of their government's foreign meddling.
La lucha sigue, sigue! La lucha sigue, sigue!
President Maduro has criticized the interventionist attempts by the Lima Group.
The Lima cartel has attempted to do against the Bolivarian revolution, against the Bolivarian government of Venezuela and all the left wing, against all the progressive sectors.
Se ha impuesto una verdadera
A real inquisition has been imposed for politics, moral and ideology in international countries that are governed by the Lima cartel.
Women from the Caribbean have condemned foreign interference in Venezuela. A statement written by human rights activists and university professors from the region called on the Caribbean to be actively promoted as a zone of peace. The statement strongly endorsed the CARICOM position on Venezuela, respect for the rule of law, and the need for a peaceful resolution in Venezuela. And the Caribbean community, CARICOM, says the region has a vested interest in maintaining peace and stability on behalf of the people of Venezuela. CARICOM has also criticized the Organization of American States about its unilateral stance in accepting Venezuela's opposition leader as the self-declared interim president. CARICOM Chairman Dr. Timothy Harris says the regional bloc rejects any military aggression towards Venezuela.
And so our position, as is the position that all small island states should take, is that we must pursue peace at all costs in Venezuela. Because the opposite of that, war, bloodshed, military intervention, will not redound to the benefit of the people of the region. We could see no benefit at all from war, from military aggression in Venezuela for the region as a whole. If you have an outbreak of military aggression and warfare, you're going to send the wrong signal.
On Monday, a protest was held in New York in front of the offices of U.S. mission to the United Nations, demanding that Washington stop intervention in the internal affairs of Venezuela.
So they're such hypocrites because they're talking about a coup d'etat, the sanctions against Venezuela, a possible coup. They're directly interfering in Venezuelan affairs. I mean, disinvestment, capital flight by the rich in Venezuela. A lot of people don't know the causes of the poverty and the problems that Venezuela is having. When you don't want to play ball with U.S. corporations, the U.S. is going to attack you one way or another. Economically, they'll even resort to violence.
And what they are trying to do in Venezuela is indicative of them being against the government. Although what they are trying to do is unprecedented, to have a coup d'etat with the president still present. That's unprecedented. But that is indicative of them being very vigorous gangsters. They are a gangster government.
I stand in solidarity with the government of Nicolás Maduro, the democratically elected president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. I'm here also for the American people to understand that Venezuela, they are not our enemies. They are our friends, they are our allies, and we need to respect their sovereignty and the democracy.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Chile has said final farewell to plastic bags in supermarkets and other large stores. After a 6-month trial period, Chile has introduced a total ban in an attempt to combat pollution. Now there is a $300 fine for those who break the law. But the ban doesn't apply to traditional markets. Chile produces 3 billion plastic bags every year. 2 people were injured after a plane crashed onto a street in Lima, Peru. No deaths have been reported. Officials say the pilot used his expertise to maneuver the plane for an emergency landing.
There's been an air accident. Apparently, the crew of this plane made an emergency landing. As a result, there's material damage to 2 vehicles and a motorcycle. A public electrical post that was hit by one of the plane's wings. The 2 captains are injured with concussions, fortunately not serious. They were able to maneuver well at the time because of their experience. There were no major consequences.
4 miners have been rescued alive after being trapped for more than 3 days in a mine in central Peru. They were trapped more than 1,000 meters below the surface after a coal mine collapsed in the municipality of Ollón last week. Dozens of rescuers worked non-stop for 4 days to save the miners. Authorities say the miners have been transferred to a hospital in Lima and that they are not in critical condition. At least 16 migrants have died and another 5 remain missing in Colombia after their boat sank off the Pacific coast. Only 8 people from the vessel, carrying mostly Congolese migrants, have been found alive, which was reportedly heading towards the United States. Authorities from the Chocó department continue searching for the 5 missing people, but their chances of survival are slim as their boat sank on January 28th. The Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has launched a new plan to search for thousands of missing people. According to the government, there are about 40,000 disappeared people in Mexico. During the announcement, the president said this problem is very painful and that the government will help the relatives of missing people. Nearly $21 million has been budgeted for the search. According to official data, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in Mexico in connection to drug trafficking violence.
It is estimated that there are currently missing people, more than 1,100 clandestine graves, around 26,000 unidentified bodies in morgues, and this is proof of the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis and human rights violations we are facing, and that we must overcome in our country.
Encinas also stressed that this strategy aims to include the participation of victims' relatives.
The fundamental objective of implementing this plan is to design with the participation of the families of the victims, the general foundations and the public policies and procedures in the orders of the government for the search, location and identification of people missing and not localized, as well as to prevent one of the fundamental challenges, to prevent, to investigate and to punish those responsible for these crimes.
Small and medium businesses in Argentina continue to suffer the effects of the economic crisis and austerity policies under President Mauricio Macri. Expenses keeps increasing while sales are decreasing. Managers say their profit margins are low or even non-existent. 44% of Argentina's GDP come from small and medium businesses, which employ 70% of Argentinian workers.
We don't have a baker. We could have one, so we would work less, but we can't have it because we can't pay for it. Consumption has decreased, expenses have increased, everything is limited.
You lose purchasing power when fees increase, the cost of living increases by 50%, and the salaries increase by 20%, so people don't consume.
We continue with our coverage of the Venezuelan political crisis as Russia urges the international community to respect the sovereignty of Venezuela and the principle of non-intervention. The European Union has officially recognized opposition figure Juan Guaidó as interim president. With us to discuss the latest is British journalist Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. At the recent UN Security Council meeting on Venezuela, the U.S. representative accused Venezuela of being a satellite state of Russia. What do you make of those comments?
Well, that was a malicious lie told by a malicious country designed to malign a peaceful country. Under Nicolas Maduro, and indeed his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, Venezuela is a fiercely independent, sovereign country which observes an independent foreign policy. And it is that reality alone which goes a very long way in accounting for why America is trying to destroy Venezuela's independence and turn Venezuela into a client state of America. And let me tell you something about Juan Guaido. This man, who has no legal or electoral legitimacy, would be the person who, God forbid, if he ever became president of Venezuela, he would surrender Venezuela's independence to America. He would turn Venezuela into a client state of America. That is the difference between Nicolas Maduro, who is a true patriot of Venezuela, and Juan Guaido, who would give Venezuela on a golden platter to the Americans. And whilst we're talking about client states, well, I'll tell you America's most trusted and important client state in the world, my country, Britain.
Now, how do you think the political crisis will play out, and what role will Russia play?
Well, there are a number of crucial factors which will enable Venezuela, in my opinion, to survive this appalling act of aggression from the United States. First and foremost, the Venezuelan people are a very patriotic, a very proud people, and they are fiercely protective of their independence and their sovereignty. And they are steadfast in their opposition to Venezuela becoming a client state of America. So that is absolutely crucial. The Venezuelan people are on board. They do not want Venezuela to be surrendered to the clutches of Messrs. Trump and Bolton. Secondly, the Venezuelan armed forces are very large, are very well equipped, are very powerful, very well led military. Therefore, if the Americans do embark on what would be an illegal military campaign against Venezuela, then the Venezuelan military will put up stiff resistance. So that is another important factor in Venezuela's favor. Also, Russia and Venezuela have a very close relationship politically, economically, and militarily, which is in accordance with the United Nations Charter and international law in general. And Russia will provide political support, as it is doing at the moment at the United Nations. Should America, for example, try to pass a resolution at the United Nations Security Council regarding Venezuela, then Russia will veto it. Russia will economically assist Venezuela, and that is important. And also as well, providing Venezuela is still able to produce and sell oil and gas, then the Venezuelan economy, more or less, will be insulated from this terrible attack from America.
One last question for you, Doctor. Would you compare this process of attempting to oust a democratically elected leader to any other instances we've seen recently, for example, in Syria, Iraq, or Libya?
Yes, absolutely. The parallels are striking. What does Syria, for example, and Iran, for example, and Venezuela, for example, have in common? Well, they are independent sovereign countries who pursue independent foreign policies, who will not surrender their independence to the Americans, who will not bow down to the diktats from Washington. And therein lies the reason why the Americans tried to overthrow the Syrian government and they failed. And therein lies the reason why the Americans are targeting not just Venezuela, but Iran. The Americans want to control Venezuela's energy sector, and they want to ensure that Russia does not have leverage in Latin America, which is traditionally America's backyard. Now, that is completely against the United Nations Charter and international law. America, in its brazen act of aggression against Venezuela, is merely demonstrating to the entire world that the US is the most criminal, the most murderous, and the most aggressive country, the most aggressive global player on the international stage.
Dr. Marcus, thank you so much for your time for Telesur. We have been speaking with British journalist Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos on the situation in Venezuela. Let's take a short break now. We'll be back. Welcome back. South Africa's election season is in full swing with political parties competing for votes. This is the country's 5th election since the democratic dispensation in 1994.
We want jobs now, we are hungry now, we want to eat now. That's why our message is very simple.
The countdown to what is dubbed the most contentious election has started. The radical far-left Economic Freedom Fighters, a breakaway party of the ruling ANC, says it's now business unusual and is promising to eradicate the high unemployment rate, chief among many social ills. The campaign rally took place in the country's capital.
They live in a capital city, yet they still have pit toilets. How can you have pit toilets in a capital city?
It says the legacy of apartheid is standing in the way of emancipation of the disadvantaged black people. He adds that corruption in the state security agencies made the situation even worse.
We must expose corrupt police who are working with drug lords here in Soshanguve, in Western Cape, in Northern Cape, and in all areas where we have problems of drugs.
Political commentators say the EFF, with only 6% of the national vote from the previous election, will not unseat the governing party, but will certainly continue to challenge the traditional politics. They say the priority for anyone who will be in the seat of government come May this year is addressing inequality.
If you want people to think of themselves as living in one country, of having the same sense of identity and being, we know that that happens in those societies where there is greater equality. So in places like Sweden and Denmark and Finland and Iceland, it's not just that the populations are what many people think of as homogeneous, is that they're also economically equal. And these societies were very poor and unequal 100 years ago. South Africa has had 25 years since its independence from and liberation from apartheid. And yet, far from becoming more equal, it has in some senses become even more unequal.
The Economic Freedom Fighters is also not the biggest political party in this country, but an important player in political landscape, putting pressure on the ruling ANC to deliver on its promises from when Nelson Mandela became the first black democratically elected president. Matiwa Matlachi, Telesur, Pretoria.
Sierra Leone has opened a graft probe into corruption and abuse by the previous government. Hearings are underway into alleged widespread corruption and abuse of office under the government of ex-president Ernest Bai Koroma. The commission will also look into allegations of stolen public funds and state assets between 2007 and 2018.
of a free hand and independence in the due discharge of my duties in this commission by His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio at the public launching of the Commission of Inquiry on Tuesday, 29th of January 2019, and I intend to be fiercely independent in the discharge of my duties in this commission.
For the first time, a trans designer has showcased her collection at New York Fashion Week. Trans woman Pierre Davis brought unisex clothes with no gender labels. Davis says fashion makes her feel more connected to New York and to the LGBTI community.
It was cool, like it was menswear, it's a unisex brand, there was some guys in the show, so I'm just humble and happy that I got to show at Fashion Week, to be honest.
And finally, Vietnamese people are marking the start of the Year of the Pig. Worshippers prayed at the Tran Quoc Pagoda, one of the oldest pagodas in capital Hanoi. The ritual is celebrated on the eve of the Lunar New Year, or Tet celebrations. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, we are on StarSat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. We're on social media as well, so go ahead and follow us. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.